There are reports that there is no evidence of a direct link between Baghdad and some of these terrorist organizations.
There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
Excuse me, but is this an unknown unknown?
I'm not.
Several unknowns, and I'm just wondering if this is an unknown.
I'm not going to say which it is.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today I'm continuing my coverage of the Tribeca Film Festival with the documentary Bodyguard of Lies, and this is another really exceptional documentary at this year's festival. So briefly, the documentary unpacks the most disastrous and controversial conflict in American history, the war in Afghanistan. The phrase Bodyguard of Lies is indirectly associated with Donald Rumsfeld during a press conference trying to justify the actions related to the Iraq war. The war in Afghanistan cost trillions of dollars, millions of lives, only to end with the Taliban stronger and more organized than ever before. At the moment, it is estimated that the Taliban is holding on to $7 billion worth of U.S. military equipment left behind after the withdrawal. The documentary interviews policymakers, politicians, soldiers to expose the extent of the deception used against the American people to lie about the progress being made. It contrasts all these interviews in order to illustrate how America's ability to manufacture consent is eroding, resulting in an increase in coercive measures in order to facilitate wars that will leave Americans poorer and more vulnerable to destruction. The film opens up with a very provocative question. How do you prove that someone isn't telling the truth? At the moment, the United States is trapped in an unending cycle of war, one that grows more destructive and the reasons for fighting harder to believe. The war in Afghanistan was touted as not just a necessity against evil, but an obligation to make the world better. Analysts in the documentary explain how from the beginning, the war in Afghanistan was not only framed as winnable, but very easy and straightforward, like this will be over in no time. Then for 16 years, the media constantly reinforced America's dominance in the region in order to justify its prolonged presence there. To support its narrative, they introduced the concept of nation building, making it seem like most of their effort was spent in building infrastructure and different institutions to help the people of Afghanistan, when in reality they were dealing with a worsening security situation in which the Taliban was getting stronger by the day. In the media, the US was building schools and hospitals and introducing rule of law. Upon closer inspection, their limited understanding of the language, the culture, and the tribal dynamics left much of the Afghan population unable to really take advantage of all this new infrastructure. To make matters worse, the US-backed regime change was riddled with corruption, elections were rigged, and a lot of the funds meant to benefit the lives of the Afghan people ended up in the pockets of very corrupt politicians. One former soldier in the documentary describes a time where he was aiming at what he thought was a Taliban fighter. However, the longer he stood watch, the more unclear it became. Was this just a man trying to protect his family, or was this a militant that was going to kill them later? And when he was asked why he didn't take the shot, he felt incredibly bad because he honestly couldn't answer the question. And this moment of doubt really highlights a deeper issue. Their inability to distinguish between friend or foe really speaks to how ignorant and ill-equipped they were to handle the security situation in Afghanistan. In the documentary, they describe how troops would frequently patrol mountainous areas, just waiting to get shot by the Taliban, and this was pretty much the only way they could keep them in check. And this became increasingly untenable as the years went by, and the Taliban became way more efficient. Attempts to outsource security responsibilities often led to military contractors being gifted billions and billions of dollars for doing the bare minimum or nothing at all. The documentary also touches on how a lot of US cities were revived by the weapons manufacturing industry and how a lot of these cities would suffer economically if these wars ended. In addition, local governments in Afghanistan really took advantage of their ignorance and would often destroy their own infrastructure and blame the Taliban in order to secure more funding. The documentary did a great job of just showing how out of their depth the US was in Afghanistan. Over the course of 16 years, the US had built this industry that they're now trapped in, And now they're stuck funding it and preserving it in order to maintain their image, both domestically and abroad. A reputation that was shattered with their abrupt and chaotic withdrawal of the country. And this was a complete disaster. It felt very sudden, extremely disorganized. The documentary interviews former translators as well as other officials who worked with soldiers in the region over the years, and they described being totally abandoned and even shot at by American soldiers when they tried to escape. And now they're being hunted down by the Taliban. Overnight, the Taliban not only returned to power, but gained access to weaponry left behind by US soldiers. Years of brutal warfare had actually increased the number of Taliban fighters. Their recruitment was at an all-time high. And even worse, it really intensified their desire to destroy any and all traces of American culture and Western culture for that matter. For 16 years, the facade of nation building enabled widespread corruption that ultimately destroyed Afghanistan's ability to ever become a stable and secure state. It also undermined the US's moral authority abroad, as Afghanistan is worse off than ever before. There's a saying, the US never withdraws, they simply redeploy. And I think the documentary did an excellent job of using Afghanistan to explain how America has become trapped in this cycle of endless wars. The US left Afghanistan in part because maintaining its corrupt practices and secrecy became nearly impossible, but also in part because it could not create a compelling enough narrative to justify staying in the region or expanding its operation in neighboring areas. Afghanistan has greatly eroded the American people's trust in their government and therefore eroded the government's ability to manufacture consent. Both Iraq and Afghanistan are more unstable and unpredictable than ever before. And it feels like the frequency and the scale of wars have increased, and we've completely lost the thread. We don't know why we're in these places anymore. The absence of clear, achievable goals means a lot of these conflicts can go on indefinitely, and the US has taken a stance where it's all or nothing. Either you do what we say or we're never leaving, and this is very unrealistic, and the way diplomacy has totally failed. Diplomacy is two sides meeting in the middle and coming to a deal that might not be ideal, but at least achieves a certain result. At the moment, it feels like the US is really acting in bad faith with a lot of these countries in trying to justify its presence there. And I think what's really scary is public pressure to stop a lot of these conflicts is becoming less and less impactful. As the US turns to more forceful measures to gain public support, what does that do to the public's trust in the government, its willingness to obey the laws, and believe in its values? And so this was an incredibly compelling documentary. Please look out for it on streaming, and until next time.